We'll be recording this just for anyone who might want to come back to it later. My name is Alex. I use she or they pronouns, no preference, and I am on the New Generations Council at New Israel Fund in Canada. So I appreciate everybody who came out to this event to learn with us today. I'm going to go with a little bit of a land acknowledgement because as we, do these events where we talk about complicated histories, it's also important to think about the complicated history of where I am as well. So for reference, I'm a white, queer, Jewish, disabled community builder and student. My family came to this land from Galicia, England, Germany, and Austria. I am the descendant of settlers colonially referred to as immigrants. I live and study at an institution on the land of the Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, the Seneca, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga nations. The city name Tikaranto comes from the Mohawk language, meaning the place in the water where the trees are standing, and that refers to wooden stakes used in fishing. People have lived here for over 10,000 years, and it is through the violent act of colonialism that we've come to call the city Toronto. I acknowledge that I am on stolen land as the result of shedding blood, and I acknowledge that we are about to engage in an event that is also related to shedding blood. I want to acknowledge that the land that we are about to discuss has multiple names. Some people call it Israel and some people call it Palestine. And I also want to acknowledge that for some, that land is a victory over colonialism, and for some, this is continued violent colonialism. So as we call in from different locations, I invite everyone to think about their relationship to the land they're on and the work that is to be done for shared and equitable societies. So we have two speakers with us today, and we really appreciate them being here and contributing their knowledge. So we have Noor, who works as a freedom of movement coordinator at the Occupied Palestinian Territory Department of Physicians for Human Rights Israel, or PHRI, where she directly assists of roughly 180 Palestinian patients each year whose medical exit permits are denied while documenting human rights violations. Noor studied sociology, anthropology, and gender studies at Tel Aviv University, where her focus was on intersectionality in the context of gender and occupation. Noor was chosen to participate in the State Department's Professional Fellows Program at the State House of Boston and United States Congress, where she provided input to the district representative on gender and intersectionality issues. Our other speaker is Naama, who has been a peace and anti-occupation activist since 2001 and has worked professionally for Israeli NGOs, most notably as a researcher at B'Tselem, and for international NGOs operating in Israel-Palestine. As part of this work, she has written about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza while never being able to visit there. Her research on Gaza has included areas such as the policies that govern the separation of families between Gaza and the West Bank and their impacts on human rights, with a focus on how these gender-blind policies have an especially harsh impact on women's rights, the water crisis and its history and involvement, and restricted access to fishing and agriculture. In her work on the West Bank and East Jerusalem, Naama is focused on areas such as detention of minors, military courts, demonstrations, demolitions, and the long-term impacts of occupation on the Palestinian economy and society. As she currently lives in Toronto, Naama supports the work of the New Israel Fund of Canada by volunteering to speak at events run by NIFC. So thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate it. We're just going to kind of dive right in. So with that, my first question for Noor and Naama is, how did we get to the current situation in Gaza? And I'm going to start off with Naama.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone for being here. They're keeping us on a very tight schedule, so I'm looking at my watch before I start. So I think anyone who works on the conflict could speak about Gaza for hours, and they're giving us a very limited time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak through one prism, and I know that Noor is going to be speaking through another in each one of the questions. But the most important thing I saw on the board, people talking about how much they want to learn and they want to understand. So this is a first step, and there's always a lot more to learn. I want to talk a little bit about restriction of movement and denial of family rights, and I'm only going to talk in the context of the West Bank and Gaza. There's also a lot of other aspects related to Israel, meaning families torn between Israel and Gaza, but I don't have enough time to cover everything. So I'm hoping to cover one subject a bit more in detail so that you can understand from it a little bit more about what has been happening in other areas as well. So how did we get here? In 1948, when the State of Israel was established, many Palestinian families were torn between the ones who stayed within the area that then became Israel, ones who were either already living or then were sent to forcefully to the West Bank or Gaza, the West Bank then being under Jordanian control and Gaza under Egyptian control, and those who went to the Palestinian diaspora. So it's important to understand that families that had always been connected to each other in areas that there was never any physical separation between were suddenly separated. In 1967, when the occupation began and Israel conquered both the West Bank and Gaza and also Sinai at the time, very quickly after, in the early 70s, all restrictions of movement were lifted so that people could travel pretty freely between the West Bank, Gaza, and Israel, and families reunited, ties were reestablished, and especially ties of marriage were something that happened a lot in those years. So because people could travel freely, it wasn't an issue. People also worked, people from Gaza worked within Israel. When I was a child in Israel, there were workers from Gaza all the time in Jerusalem. And this changed really in 1988 at the time of the first Intifada. And I'm assuming people know what that is, but if there are key things that I say that you don't, please feel free to ask in the chat and I'll try to answer as best I can. So in 1988, it changed that there kind of had to be some sort of permit for people to leave. The free movement was stopped. The bigger change was in 1991 when the permit had to be a permit by name, a personal permit for you to move around. However, if you were married to someone, if you were from Gaza and married to someone from the West Bank or vice versa, you still could pretty easily get a permit to go visit your family and to move around. People often like to think about the watershed moment as 2007 and the Hamas takeover, but that actually isn't true. The watershed moment in terms of the freedom of movement between West Bank and Gaza is 2000 and the Second Intifada. In the Oslo Accords, the understanding was that Gaza and the West Bank are one area and there needs to be freedom of movement between them, and there was supposed to be a safe passage set up, 2 safe passages, one in the north and one in the south, so that people could pass freely between the West Bank and Gaza without needing any permits to go through Israel, without being considered that they went through Israel, without any questions being asked. In practice, only the southern passage was operating, and only from October 99 until September 2000 when the Second Intifada began. So really at no point after the Oslo Accords was this established. For the people who did pass through the safe passage, we're going to talk about the fact that for the free passage, it did cause some issues later on. So in 2000, what happened was that Israel decided that there would no longer be any updates of addresses of people who are moving from the West Bank to Gaza. So there was a decision to moving from Gaza to the West Bank. There was a decision to completely restrict movement out of Gaza. The way Israel was able to control that is that under the Oslo Accords, the Palestinian Authority has authority over registration of births, deaths, addresses, etc. However, that copy is then sent over to Israel, and Israel refused to update its copy with anything related to Palestinians moving from Gaza to the West Bank. They still update if you're born, if you died, and if you want to move from the West Bank to Gaza, you can. But the other way around, they decided to no longer allow it. And that is basically the rule that has applied since then, with a few exceptions of different gestures that have happened at different times, often under international pressure, when a whole list of people were given permission to change their address to the West Bank from Gaza. But if you think about people who are marrying, people who are moving around for jobs or whatever it may be, all these people who tried to move around were not allowed to move around. And even if they managed to get from Gaza to the West Bank, for example, that then couldn't go back. And if they're caught at a checkpoint and it says that they live in Gaza, because that's what the Israeli registration says, they could be sent back. So for example, if you're a young woman who is married off to someone who lives in the West Bank and you're caught at a checkpoint, you could be separated from your children, separated from your now family, sent back to your family in Gaza and not know when you're ever going to be able to see them again. So this creates a lot of pressure on people in that situation. Right now, and this has been throughout, there have been slight changes over time, but the bottom line is that what happens is if you live in Gaza and you want to visit the West Bank for your family, or you live in the West Bank and you want to visit Gaza, there are really only 2 situations where you can do that. One is if an immediate family member is very ill. And in that context, we know that many times people are asked to bring a lot of documentation and they're told that the person isn't ill enough. And there is a lot of hardship in that respect. And the other is two kinds of events that happen to an immediate family member, which is a wedding or if they passed away. And in all of those cases, in the cases that have been documented that I've worked on when I worked for B'Tselem, that Hamuked, which is one of the Israeli human rights organizations that works on freedom of movement, has worked on as well. There can be delays so that people often will miss the funeral because Muslim funerals are conducted on the same day. People will miss the wedding, people don't get a response. And often when we're talking about a person being deathly ill, unfortunately, they don't get to visit the person while they're still alive. The permit only comes when the person has died. So really very big limitations. When is there free access? If someone from the West Bank wants to change their address to Gaza, move there forever, have all the same restrictions so that they can't go back and visit their family. I'm running out of time, but I hope it's a little bit clear. I'm going to pass it on to Noor now, just how limited it is. And what I wanted to give for context, just in the Canadian context, imagine people living in 2 different Canadian provinces being told, if you marry someone from the other province, you can't move there, or you have to move there and you won't be able to go back to visit your family except for in these very extreme situations. This, of course, has very severe human rights impacts, and that's just to understand how we've gone into the situation from where it was free to where there was a clear decision that Gaza and West Bank should not be mixed and they should be seen as 2 separate areas. And there was an admission that contrary to the Oslo Accords, Israel now sees them as 2 separate areas with no right for people to travel between the 2. And now I'm going to pass on to Noor.
شكرا نعمة. مرحبا, hi everyone. I'm going to give 2 sentences about the current situation, and due to the, I don't think we have so much time, and then I'm going to move to talk about the health system. As a freedom of movement coordinator, this is my profession and I'll be focusing on it. As Naama did say, there is a full shutdown and barriers where it's all over Gaza Strip. I think Gaza Strip, it's 32 kilometers. It's like from going from my the Palestinian village I live in to Yafa. This is where I work for Physicians for Human Rights. So this is where Gazans on Gaza can move between since 2006. So the most 3 famous barriers that can Gazans cross from is called Erez. So you can go to Israel and sometimes Jordan from there, and the West Bank. There is Rafah, where you can go to Egypt, and there's Kerem Shalom, where you get all of the materials. It's important to mention here that everything that get in on Gaza Strip, medical equipment, anything, it has to pass. There's a list that the Israeli authorities give what you can enter or not. For example, online shopping is just a dream or a privilege they cannot even offer. This is just a glimpse of how it looks or feels like to live in, as we call it, an open prison. So as we have said, it's total shutdown, and I'm going now to talk about the health system, so I'm going to talk about what Naama did mention earlier about the Oslo Agreement that took place in 1993, where all of the things were divided, where the Palestinian Authority, where Israel gave the Palestinian Authority responsibility for everything that has anything to do with health. But basically, they did divide it that way without giving the economical power to the Palestinian Authority. So the economical power and the policies that is on the ground is still certain by the Israeli authorities, but as it looks like, I mean, just as a name or what it's written in the paper, it's for the Palestinian Authority. So when we're talking about the health system, it's fragmented in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza Strip, where financial coverage or anything that has anything to do with the medical staff has to be financed by this authority that it's already fragmented in too many places. And when we say that, it's the power is not in one place, and when is the power is not in the one place, and there is not enough economical power, such ramifications did lead to a very bad situation in the health Palestinian system, where it's really affected by the ongoing attacks on Gaza. Almost, it was the last August and in May 2021. And all the corona and the vaccines did harm it really, really badly. This is everything that I'm going to say. It's in addition to the already blockade that is since 2006 on Gaza Strip. And the social determinant, which is not, this is not the medical factors that influences the health outcomes, where I think Naama will be talking about it more about the water and what you need to have in your house as an individual living in Gaza Strip or anywhere in the world. So, and one thing before I move to talk about the permit requests, I'm going to say that life-saving treatments are not available in Gaza Strip. So if we're going to talk about cancer patients, anyone from Gaza must get a document. It's actually more complicated than traveling. When you travel, if you have a passport and you don't need a visa, you just go to Skyscanner, pick which ticket is cheaper, and then one day or 1 month you are on your plan. This is not the case when you need to get out of Gaza Strip. If we are talking about medical permit, funerals, anything, you must get this permit that it's actually most of the time is valid for only 1 day. So if we're talking about patients, and basically I'll be focusing in cancer patients where their treatment is not available. And actually a lot of the treatments are not available in Gaza Strip since the cut downs and the bad situation of the health ministry there. So a cancer patient cannot get a treatment on Gaza Strip, and if yes, maybe just the first protocol. And after this, they have to go to hospitals, mostly in East Jerusalem or the West Bank. So I'm going to give just some statistics. Last year, we did received 180 permit requests where they were denied or delayed by the Israeli Authority. And when we say that, it's a big number, since all of these people were just denied or delayed for at least three times, which means they have been waiting for half a year at least. I have worked for people almost 1 year, not to go to see their lover or to get married, only to go outside of Gaza Strip to get a treatment. And as I've said, it's only valid for 1 day. And in these matters, I would like to mention that we lose some people in the process. In August, I was working for a permit request for a boy that he was denied. I think he was, if I remember, 14 years old. He had the cancer and he did pass away in August, where he was waiting for his permit request. And before that, he was waiting for 2 or 3 months. Another patient that we did lose, she was a woman, 37 years old. She had cancer and she was waiting for the same 3 months or more to get her life-saving treatment. And they give her a permit only in the day where she was operated by an ambulance. And when she arrived to the hospital, she passed away. And actually, as Naama said, sometimes people get permit to go to funeral. Actually, I did work 7 hours on a Sunday, which is the first day of the week for us, only to bring a dead body, okay, from a hospital in Israel to Gaza. For 7 hours, I have to talk to the Israeli authorities and the police just to get a dead body. It was really one of the most frustrated cases I have worked on, to see even dead bodies have to go through this. it's hard actually to talk to the families too about it. So as I've mentioned, when the statistics we have this year, until the half year, until June 2022, we had more than 40%. Last year we had 40% of cancer patients that were denied or delayed by the Israeli authorities. And this year we have more than 40%, maybe 42, 45%, with the same denied or delays, where people were delayed for 3 or 4 months in access to their healthcare treatment. And I think I'm going to stop here. Maybe I can continue.
Thank you so much for sharing and your very real experiences and the realities of what is happening in terms of permits and being able to move freely. Naama, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the current situation in terms of the permit system and water and access to water.
Yes, thank you. So this is almost like a Gaza speed dating, it feels like touching on subjects very briefly. So just in terms of the permits and the current situation, what I want to say is that things, despite a lot of efforts, especially on the legal front, to try and ease restrictions on Gaza, there have been very few gains made over the years. And even there used to be the blockade. This was after Gilad Shalit was abducted in 2006, and after Hamas came into power in 2007, there was a complete blockade, and there were no commodities allowed into Gaza unless they were on an approved list. And then things changed, and they said, no, we're going to allow in things. This was after the Marmara, the Turkish boat and the takeover, and a lot of diplomatic heat that Israel took in the Turkle Commission. The change was that the blockade was changing, and it was no longer only what we allow in goes in, but what we don't allow in doesn't go in, and everything else can go in. There have been small changes so that you can get food more easily, or different food products more easily. But all in all, the complete control over what goes in and out of Gaza, if it's goods and if it's people, has remained and has only gotten more severe. And the COVID crisis really brought to light just how easily even the little bit that there is can be taken away. So for families who are separated between Gaza and the West Bank, for example, which is the prison I was talking about before, during COVID, just completely, okay, we're not letting people in or out. And then even when they were easing restrictions of movement, other places in Israel, that remained in place for much longer. So it's important to understand that any gains made in Gaza are always very limited, and they're always very, very sensitive and delicate. And that's really what I want to talk to about, wanted to address right now in the context. So the situation in Gaza is very sensitive. People don't have enough water. I'm going to talk a little about that more. They don't have enough food. They don't have enough money. There's almost 50% unemployment. If it goes between 45 point something to 47 point something, those are the numbers I've seen. Effectively, very, very high rate of unemployment. Sorry, got excited. There isn't enough energy. So there isn't enough electricity. So even things like, okay, we'll desalinate our own water if you can't, or we will purify our own sewage so that we won't be creating so much sewage flowing into the sea. Without continuous energy, you can't do that. You also can't run a washing machine without energy. You can't run a school. So for example, because so many schools were harmed, there are usually 2 shifts for most schools in Gaza. But once it gets dark out early, if you don't have electricity for the afternoon shift, or if it's limited, then these are a lot of things that can just impact everyday life in very real ways. So in a place where resources are so scarce, things like the climate crisis around the world could have an even bigger effect. And that's kind of what I want to talk about now. And I'm, for this, going to be referring to a report written by, I translated here, sorry, the Institution for National Security Research, and I can send you a link to it after, because I actually also found it in English this morning. Okay, so in terms of the water situation, when I was at B'Tselem, one of the portfolios I worked on was the water situation, working on the water crisis both in West Bank and Gaza. I want to give you a tiny bit of history, and then I want to explain where things are at and how things just keep on getting worse. So Gaza gets its water from the coastal aquifer. It's an aquifer that runs from north to south along the coast of the Mediterranean. And because of the way that that aquifer just works in terms of the natural flow of water, there's water that's used that flows into Gaza. There's water that's used in Israel further north and doesn't really impact because just everything flows wherever it flows. And there's also water that's used in Egypt. So it's a joint aquifer. That aquifer was over extracted even before 67. So it was already in a situation where they were extracting more water than the natural replenishing rate of the aquifer, meaning that water was already running out in Gaza before Israel took over. However, the situation since then has exacerbated the crisis. So the water Gaza has become the most crowded place in the world. An average woman in Gaza has 3.9 children over her lifetime, which is more even than in Israel, where it's 3.1, and much more than the rates here in Canada, which I apparently myself am trying to balance out. But the rates here are very, very low. People have very few children in most Western countries. So it's very crowded. There are more people. The aquifer is not getting more water. And if the original thought was that maybe water from the West Bank could be used for Gaza, a whole other lecture, but the situation in the West Bank is that all the promises that were made for water in the West Bank were based on assumptions that future drillings would lead to more water resources, and all the water promised for Palestinians in the Oslo Accords that was additional to what they already had was based on those future drillings. And those didn't happen, meaning they didn't actually lead to more water even before the current water and climate crisis that's happening around the world, and it's certainly not likely to happen. And as resources become more scarce, they're going to become even more scarce for people who don't have enough. So in Gaza, the average water usage is 88 liters per day, when the World Health Organization recommendation is a minimum of 100 liters per day per person. So it's already below. But what's most important to understand is that most of the water that people get is not drinkable. The numbers go between 94 and 96%, depending on which report you're looking at. But most of the water in Gaza is called brackish water. You can feel that it's salty. So I've been told by people who've been there. I haven't been there. And people use private desalination plants that they pay money that they don't have to get water from them. These are not regulated. So even though it may be that the water doesn't taste as salty, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the dangerous elements have been taken out of the water. So people's health is being harmed by the water that they're drinking, by the water that they're using all the time. Despite many people in the international community talking about the importance of solving the water Gaza crisis, nothing realistic has actually happened. There is a huge plan of the European Union to build a desalination plant that still would not fulfill the needs of Gaza, but they've been dragging their feet for over a decade. And what I discovered when I was working for Oxfam and I was in Brussels talking to different diplomats about the situation in Gaza, the only thing they were willing to talk about that related to Gaza was the water desalination plant. And the only thing they were willing to say was, yes, we want to build a water desalination plant, but they had no operational plan of how to do it, both ecologically, because there are a lot of issues, and in terms of just feasibility, because Israel bombed the central power station in 2006. Israel wasn't willing to give any guarantees that it wouldn't be bombing this desalination plant that the international community was going to be investing in. So it wasn't feasible. They weren't going to get money to do it. And even though it supposedly is advancing, it's not yet operational in any way. It's not going to be anytime soon, and it's not going to meet all the needs. In 2014, after Operation Tzuk Eitan, don't remember the name in English, sorry. The operation in 2014, the Gaza reconstruction mechanism was established. And under that mechanism, the international community was supposed to be able to get access to all sorts of materials that otherwise weren't allowed to be brought into Gaza, with projects that they were overseeing in order to rebuild Gaza after the war. What's happened is that rather than promoting reconstruction, the reconstruction mechanism actually delays it because everything needs approvals. It's very, very hard to get anything in. And in fact, they haven't been able to they're not able to bring materials in at a rate that can overcome the need and can overcome the damage that has been done. So that, for example, they can desalinate water better in Gaza. They can replenish different reservoirs that they have, et cetera. In terms of the coastal aquifer, because of sea levels rising, more and more seawater is infiltrating the aquifer itself, so that climate change is impacting the water quality, and that if the aquifer was already low and they were already going into the areas of the aquifer and taking out water that was already no good, it's now even more contaminated because it gets seawater in it. And because they can't properly purify sewage, Gaza continues to contaminate the sea from which the water is coming in to the aquifer. So creating a very problematic loop there. So really, in terms of climate change, the international things that are happening across the world, like sea level rising, is creating even more problems for Gaza. And the scarcity of water means that everyone's going to be fighting over it even more, and there are even fewer solutions for a place where people already did not have enough water. And I think I'm out of my time because that keeps on happening, and I'm going to pass the microphone on to Noor.
Yeah, thank you so much for that background on the water access and inaccess that is happening in Gaza and how that continues to be recycled, for lack of a better term, with that. So with, hearing about, Noor, like the work that you've done and the things that you've had to deal with, and especially in the past year, what do you wish people understood more about Gaza and the situation and the blockade and inaccess?
Thank you, Alex. Maybe one thing to add that it's going to be more surprising, in addition to what Naama said, that even the sea is divided. Like you can't cross, I don't remember the kilometers, but you have to stay for a line in the port of Gaza. And if you just cross it, you're gonna be shot. And a lot of people that shot, some people live from this actually in Gaza. And if they just cross this line, they did shut them. It's just to add, in terms of really madness of even the sea, people can't enter freely. Actually, I think first of all to try to be in people's shoes, and what I mean by this. Just to imagine yourself not being able, not even to travel, but to go from village to another, from city to another, in any place in the world you are living in. And the second thing is raising awareness. For example, in the last attack on May 2021, it was really fatal to the health system in Gaza Strip, where two doctors, one of them was responsible for all the vaccines and the tests of corona in Shifa hospital and in another places in Gaza, and another psychiatric that was also attacked by MISIL to their houses. So I think knowing more about what's going on there, not only actually checking out when there is an attack and where the situation is so fatal, like in every ongoing attack that is in Gaza Strip, but this is why I decided to more focusing about the health system. Now I am working on long-term permits for cancer patients. We did some beta petition to the court regarding this, since I've been working for 2 years in Physicians for Human Rights and was all the time more and more shocked that people has to die to get this life-saving treatment or to shut down their treatment. So we did submit this petition. We are going to publish a position paper next week. So maybe this will be great that all of you can have this position paper to read more about it, what's going on there. I think today we won't have enough time to talk about, especially it's in Zoom. Like, I don't know if I said all the things that I wanted to say. So this position paper, we did put everything on it, especially about the healthcare system, the long-term permits, why we are demanding this for cancer patients. And I think raising awareness in this part, or any action that you can take when there's anything to do with supporting health system in Gaza Strip or and talking to people about it. Naama, you will have enough time now.
We still have another question for you, but for Alex's question about what I wish people knew, first of all, by coming here and spending an hour, you're already willing to listen to about what's happening in Gaza more than most Israelis. And that's something that's really important to understand. It is so painful for me as an Israeli to say this, but people in Israel see Gaza only through, oh, it's the Hamas throwing rockets. They voted for Hamas, so they deserve it. And therefore not seeing them as people at all, which is something that's really, really painful. There is no solution, long-term solution, that is in any way involves any form of peace without Gaza. Gaza is not going to disappear into the sea, though some people might hope that it does. The people there continue to live, continue to want to thrive and have all the normal things that other people want. The vast majority of people who live in Gaza today could not vote in 2007. Most of them were not even born because most of the people in Gaza are children. And therefore, this mindset that so many Israelis have and so many Jews also in the diaspora have about, well, it's their fault and they voted for Hamas and they support Hamas and therefore there's nothing that we care about or want to do, is really, really a problem. The introduction didn't tell you this, but in other lectures I've given for NXC, I mentioned it. I was an intelligence officer at the height of the Second Intifada. And before, I worked on issues related to Gaza Strip. I then became a peace activist and then worked on issues related to Gaza at B'Tselem and in other organizations. I never got to meet anyone from Gaza until I was in Sweden for B'Tselem and met people from Gaza there. And when I had colleagues in international organizations, I met with them in Amman because I couldn't go to Gaza. I couldn't meet people from Gaza and Israel. I couldn't see Gaza. It is really easy to put a problem out of your mind if you can't see it and if you feel so emotionally threatened by it. But it's really just important to know that there are people there. My colleagues who are working in Gaza were often at risk. B'Tselem, there were sometimes times when B'Tselem wanted to collect information about things and it was too dangerous for our field researchers to do it because of the Hamas regime. When you meet with people from Gaza, outside Gaza, they can tell you about how much they hate Hamas. Of course, I only met a few people. I did not meet 2.1 million people. But it's really important to understand that it's not a simplified picture of good and evil. That is the story that so many Israelis and Jews want to tell themselves in order to excuse themselves for what is happening there in our name, for what our policies are doing to people. Not that any solution is easy. But Gaza is not behind these hidden dark hills, really, in reality. It's right there. It's right here when we're in Israel. And the problems of Gaza, when they explode as violence, and I'm not saying this to justify violence, is the only time when anybody ever hears it. So if you think of a pressure cooker, when the pressure cooker explodes, that's the only time that you think that there's a problem, and people ignore it the rest of the time. So yeah, just one last thing. I was involved in the B'Tselem submission for the Turco Commission in 2010, or maybe it was 2011. And the way that the Israeli human rights organizations that came to speak in front of the commission were treated by the Israeli judges who were there, the way we were dismissed, the way that our executive director of B'Tselem was interrupted. And this was in the papers about like everybody else got to speak, but then the executive director of B'Tselem, who was also female at the time, got up to speak and she was interrupted every other second. And anything she said about the suffering of the people of Gaza was second guessed or doubted or told, yeah, well, but they support Hamas. So therefore, is a big part of why it's hard to talk about these things. No one is willing to listen. And as an Israeli, when you come and you try to explain why these are issues and why we need to care about them, you're immediately categorized as you're left-wing, you're a traitor, you're dangerous, you're supporting terrorists, automatically, just by admitting that people in Gaza are people, already puts you in that camp in the Israeli Jewish society. So just by coming here today, I'm grateful to all of you for coming and listening and for hearing what I have to say from my previous experience and Noor from her everyday experience now, which is really important that you're willing to listen. And I hope that you'll want to learn more. So yeah, sorry, that was a little messed up, but I hope I got that across.
That's okay. That was great. Thank you so much. So, Noor, the work you're doing is difficult. The fact that, that 7 hours having to deal with just trying to transport someone loved one who's died and being with that body, and, the boy that you also tried to help, there's a lot here that's quite heavy that you're carrying. And so, our question for you is, how did you get into the work that you do, and where do you pull your resilience from, and where do you see it in Gaza?
It's a hard question to answer, actually. First of all, it's a really personal place. As coming from a Palestinian family, my family that I always heard stories from my grandmother talking about Gaza, about employees and women from Gaza that was in our village. And my family did also suffer. We are in the green line. So until 67, we were belonging to Jordan. And after the Israel military did end, quote, only for the Palestinian, sorry, I was confused here, when it was a war back then, as always, and Israel did take these all the villages that was in the green line, and one of them is my village. So basically, the place I'm coming from, like that the things that you are born with, the stories you hear. I was always to volunteering with kids in hospitals. I just wanted to do this humanitarian work. And then actually it was in Corona when I have started working. It was when Trump decided the annexation plan. It was funny that my village was one of the villages that they wanted to annex actually back then. And it was all the coordination stopped between the Israeli authorities and the Palestinian Authority. So this is where only Physicians for Human Rights were working with the patients back then, since the Civil Palestinian Authority are the formal association that apply to these permits. So it just led me all my personal, I could say, baggage that I'm coming from, my humanitarian work. I was always involved with volunteering. I have a lot of my friends are from Gaza. My friends on Gaza, I'm always scared when there's an attack and checking out on them that they are not dying. Just when there are missiles there, then we know, I just check on her like, are you fine? Because I don't know if you know this, but there are no shelters, no place. I remember like one of the day, my best friend there, we did actually meet abroad too. I can't go to Gaza, even though I'm a Palestinian, and I do not meet. I met only the kids on the hospitals from Gaza, and this friend I met abroad too, when I was in Germany. I'm always in every attack scared that it's something going to happen to her. So this place to let me do this work, since I wanted to do something. And even through the work, we try, and I personally try to be practical, where to change policies. And this is what we are doing now for the link I've sent and regarding long-term permits. As I've said, we did some beta petition and we are writing on this. So I wanted to not only to do the humanitarian work, but to try to change policies, the situation, as Naama did just say, and I can't be optimistic where there's no place to this. The situation is going just harder and harder. The ramification, the blockade, the killing. Actually, I did read, and the UN, I guess, did release it this week, that the situation is as bad as it was in 2005. Regarding the killing of the Palestinians, and the closing of the barriers. So everything that is going on lead me to do that. So I think this is pretty much my package. Let's hear Naama.
I think we want to move on to Q&A now. No?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we do. We do have a question that was submitted from registration that we want to make sure we have time for. So for this next little bit, we have our Q&A time, so folks are welcome to submit questions. First one that was asked was, how does Israel interact politically and or militarily with Palestinian peace activists in Gaza? And I'll let either of you.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, and I can put in the chat for you, and it's, how does Israel interact politically and or militarily with Palestinian peace activists in Gaza?
I'm not sure it does.
I think it's just the same. Like, there's nothing like special if you are an activist or a doctor. I mean, if a doctor can't get a permit request, and just after submitting petitions can get a permit. So this is why I think we were just nothing, because there is no place actually to that. And in 2019, it was the return, I forgot the name, in the March of Return. Gazans and activists did go to the border. Actually, a lot of people the soldiers did shot a lot of civilians. And there's Razan, she was a nurse. They did shot her too. And after, I don't know if in the same year or after a year, Yasser Murtaja, he was a photographer, he was shot. So I think everyone is just, as the doctors have mentioned earlier, were killed by missiles when they were in their houses. So everyone is just, nobody have like legitimization that he or she is not going to be attacked.
Maybe just one other thing. The civilians of Gaza have been treated as collateral damage. And then it's always about who was identified with Hamas, and they'll always try to find even the most remote identification of anyone who was hurt in a bombing with Hamas. If that person 10 years ago was at a Hamas gathering at a university, they're going to tell you about it. They're going to say they were a Hamas activist. It's always about how Israel can affiliate people who were harmed with Hamas. It's not about whether people were innocent or even supporting peace or anything like that. And it's gotten more and more extreme in that I can say when I was in the military, I feel there was more concern about not harming civilians in Gaza. And I myself was involved in stopping of bombings of places where civilian people were going to be overnight in the year 2000, at the beginning of the first Intifada. I realized that we had a target list that included a lot of offices that were supposed to be empty of different Palestinian security forces. And then I had information that people who could not get home overnight because the roads were being blocked because of everything that was happening were going to be put up for the night in those offices. And I managed to get them off the target list. I was like hysterically calling every place I could. I was a young officer in the army to get them off so that people would not be harmed. And at the time, I felt, and of course, I've gone through a lot, and I don't know how I would feel if I were in that position now, but kind of like, of course, we don't want to harm innocent civilians. Slowly, even when I was still in the military, it became more and more, as long as there are up to 2 men who are unidentified, but it's only men who are adults, then it's okay if we have this bombing. And then there was Salah Shadeh in 2002, and kind of bombing an entire building in Gaza in order to kill him. He was a very key Hamas leader, and just more and more over time, civilians have become collateral damage in Gaza, and the fact that someone holds beliefs that support peace don't seem to make any difference. Yeah.
I would like to add two things regarding this. When they say that Hamas or Jihad or whatever using civilians as a shelter or whatever, there's like, you can't say such a thing about Gaza, since Gaza, all of it, like people living one under another. So if you are talking about Khan Yunis, Khuza, like it's really bagged. So there is, I'm sure you hear a lot about this in media, and maybe this is one of the things that I would like to mention, like to hear what people say about Gaza, and not only to check out the media every once in a while, since, for example, everyone believes that they are using kits and I don't know what. It's really, the population is so, as I've said earlier, living one under another. This is the first note I wanted to say. And the second thing is Gaza is just like every place in the world where people support leftists and other people support rightists. For example, there's an elections for the 5th time now in Israel, and Tuesday. Same thing about Bibi, Likud, all this. So the same thing in Gaza. So all this Hamas, supporting Hamas or not, it's like in every, I know maybe it's a shock to hear this, but it's in like in every place in the world, some people support Hamas and other people support more leftist groups. So I don't know, like why they still have to use such a cause to bomb people or not to give them. Some people die because they have a grand, I don't know what, father that was, that he did support Hamas, like from his ancestors. What this has to do with him? And someone, like I worked for a case on someone that he didn't go, and maybe he already died because of that. So I talked a lot, sorry.
No, thank you. I really appreciate that you're bringing in like the authentic, you know, like frustrations that come into this, and the fact that like there are, you know, these hereditary ties that may or not be as relevant today. Due to timing, I'm going to read out the two questions we have in the chat, and I'll let y'all answer them. So we have one from Carly that is there any shred of hope that keeps you working towards the change? And we have Jillian, who has also asked, do you think that the majority of the blockades and restrictions by Israel are in response to Hamas? Do Gazans feel powerless as a result? Do you think it will be possible, the chance for them to have a fair democratic election? I will let y'all answer which ones feel you're most called to, but it is very important that you're, you know, I really appreciate that you're bringing in your very real self into the conversation. So thank you.
Noor, you look like you're still thinking, so maybe I'll give one quick answer.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, I wanted to answer about the, sorry. I have my phone here because I had things open to, for data to show to, if in case I need to look quickly. I want to answer about the fair and democratic elections. I think since 9/11, with the American interventions in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and the thought, those were good examples, and there are many examples previously in history of thinking, oh, we're just going to bring free democracy to all these different places in the world, and then we'll have elections, and then everything will be fine, and everything turned to, use whatever bad word you want to use. The society in Gaza and Palestinian society in general is not what you think of when you think even of the Free Democratic Society in Israel, or what you're thinking of here in Canada. And that's really important as your initial point of view when you're looking at this. To be able to have free and democratic elections in a place like Gaza that's been oppressed for so long and has been oppressed both by Israel and by Hamas, in terms of freedom of thought, in terms of development of civil society institutions, they don't exist. So to get to a situation where you could have some form of democracy requires so many things to happen that I don't anticipate happening anytime soon. So it's just really important to say, like, just holding an election isn't what's going to make democracy happen. Democracy is much deeper than just voting. And the way society has been oppressed by everything that has happened throughout the conflict in Gaza means that it can't happen. It would take a very, very long process for it to happen, and would need to be very deliberate and would need to be enabling. And right now we're at the point where we want cancer patients to be able to get care. So like to think about things that are so far beyond that are kind of difficult to think about in that context. I will just say, because that sounded very depressing, my view on this is that ultimately something has to give. In the end, we know there has to be a solution. We have to believe in it. We have to work towards it. We have to educate ourselves and educate others so that we can reach that point. Personally, as an Israeli, I look at it from my responsibility as an Israeli is to make my country a better place. And that is what I always did as an activist. That was what was motivating me. And that's also the answer to why do you only care about why when Israel is violating human rights and not other countries? Well, I don't live in I do care about Canada. I also live here now, but just other countries in the world that they always want to bring random things that because it's my country, or even as a diaspora Jew, I have a I think diaspora Jews have a responsibility for what's happening and for understanding what's happening there. So that's just something has to give in the end. That's my bottom line answer as to what gives me hope.
Yeah, I think it's like talking to a woman in Gaza about feminism, and you have responsibility in your over your body, which makes sense, but she can't get a treatment, life-saving treatment for cancer. So for me, as a freedom of movement coordinator, I have this on my head every day. Like, I can talk to this woman about it since it's a privilege. Even though as a Palestinian, I am a Palestinian woman, and still I'm more privileged than her, and I won't mention such a thing. I will mention it to my best friend living there because we are in the same spectrum. And even for her, I'm not going to be, for example, all this to tell her, oh, you can do this and that. So I think this sensitivity is very important when we talk about such places that has been in ongoing blockade for 15 plus years. And about the first question about the change towards change, as I've said, I think any work that contains changing of policies, principal work, changing of policies, as Physicians for Human Rights do it. Naama did mention earlier Hamoked. A lot of associations do that. So I think keep an eye on such associations when they need support for example, just maybe only to publish whatever they are petition they are just publishing. So I think for me, as someone that works in Gaza right now in the current situation, it really helps to just make our work more to publish it when we talk about policy change. Thank you.
That actually is a perfect way to conclude with, actions that also we over here can take in terms of keeping an eye on these key points and making sure that these get lifted up.
Thank you. Week. I will send you the link. Stay tuned next week. I will send you the link, and maybe the audience can benefit from it too.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for
Thank you for your time.
Discussion. I know that, an hour was not enough for everything, but I think this is a really great starting point for a lot of folks to gain a deeper understanding. And yeah, this was absolutely incredible. Thank you both so much. Thank you everybody for coming. And
have a great day.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you.